To the 70s pop song, It Does Rain in Indianapolis in the Summertime. So we're inside at the Bonner Thompson Center. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the tools of the trade. I know a lot of you have seen the videos that we've done, and we're very appreciative for your interest. And you probably have thought, Paul, how do you know this stuff? Is it magic? Well, yeah, it is. No, really, actually, it's luck. It's luck and it's hard work, and it's a few simple tools and kind of knowing how to use them. So we're going to talk about that today. And these are things that are in the permanent collection at Bonner Thompson Center, but you can go online and use the IUPUI website, and there are a couple other places you can find this. Indiana University has the Indiana Sanborn Maps. So there are these in IUPUI digital collections. Look for the Sanborn Maps and Indianapolis City Directories. That's what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to start with an old map from maybe 1870s, 1880s here of Irvington. This is one of the tools, and you can see it does include some buildings. When we talked about Irving Circle some time ago, we mentioned that there was a school, and here it is appearing on this map. So these are good documentation. They do show some houses. It's not terribly precise. Now, then this kind of map was used for real estate purposes. This is called a Baist real estate map. And then there's also Sanborn fire insurance maps. And so these maps were really not made for historical purposes. They were made for a specific business purpose. This one was to let people know at a glance if you were going to buy a lot in Eastern Heights on the east side of Indianapolis, where did that lot look like, and what did the houses generally look like? What was the layout of that area if you were going to invest in that area, or if you were a home buyer or real estate agent? What could you tell people about that area over the phone? So these are the resources. Of course, no digital resources in the early 1900s, just these written resources. So these maps would be printed and they would be updated. The older version would be set aside. And so that becomes then, of course, a historical document. And this one, help me, Steve, is this 1941?
I think so.
This is a 1941 map. So for the Baist maps, there are various decades in which they did this. And for the Sanborn fire insurance maps, which were made for purposes of insuring your property against fire loss, those were made at other years. Now the Sanborn maps are even more detailed than these, but you can see there's well, you may not be able to see too much. There's a key here. Pink houses, or pink buildings are brick. Light blue or stone or concrete. Yellow is usually wood frame, or I guess they just have plain white is just wood frame. And so these are a nice research tool. Now over here, I have city directories. So if you're familiar with phone books, and of course, hardly anyone is familiar with the phone book these days, but this is how we kept information on people and places back at that time. Now you'd get on Google. This was sort of the printed Google of its time. And we're here in the white pages. The white pages are people. People alphabetical by last name. And you can, if you could see a little more detailed, when you pull this up online, you'll be able to see, sometimes you can even see what the people did for a living, or where they worked. So by using this, you can get a lot of information about people. Of course, some of that is in the U.S. Census. Now I'm going to skip back here. Of course, you've heard of the white pages when you got a phone book way back when. And then you have the yellow pages. This is why they were called the yellow pages, is in these city directories, these pages were yellow. Now we come to a key part of the directory. There's a few other notices, a legal section actually that's blue. We get to these pinkish pages, and these are very important because, of course, if you're saying, well, Paul, I don't know who lived in my house, so having an alphabetical directory is of no use to me. This tells you who lived in your house because this is a cross index, and here I've conveniently opened to Leslie Avenue, which is one of Irvington's streets. And you can see there are house numbers and then the name of the resident. Once you get that name, you can go back up, skip up to the white pages, and maybe you'll get lucky and it'll tell you what that person did for a living. And so this one, actually, what is this one here? This one is 1949. We have back behind here a 1964. I'm actually in this one as a 4-year-old. 1977, 78. I'm in this one as a teenager. You'll notice this one says Suburban Directory because they divided Indianapolis into things inside the city limits, that would be the regular city directory, and things outside the city limits. If you're familiar with Indianapolis, you know what that means. If you're living up in Pike Township in the 1970s, that was technically outside of the old city limits. That's just the way they divided it up at that time. The Suburban Directory works exactly the same way as the city directory. And these were made up on until the 2000s. So they're all available online through IUPUI. We happen to have these actual copies, and you can see how hefty these are. They also have these at the state library, I believe. They still have the actual hard copies if you just like dealing with the old printed version, if it's easier on your eyes. So another trick you can use, I will backtrack a little bit with the maps. So there's a wonderful mapping system that the city of Indianapolis has created. It's called Map Indy. You can go to that, and there's a special tool that actually layers these historical maps over a current aerial view of Indianapolis, which is very fascinating to do. And they haven't scanned all of these Sanborn and Baist maps in, but enough that you can really correlate with some of the historic aerial maps they have on that system. So that, again, gives you a very broad brush. If you're just researching a neighborhood, when was this area built out? You can use that Map Indy tool. It's a really neat, handy tool. A couple of the other more populous counties in Indiana have done that. I believe Allen County, that's Fort Wayne. Hamilton County, I think, has a similar system. And I think up in the Calumet area, I think a couple of towns, cities up there have something like that lets you pull up historic aerial maps and layer them over current maps. Of course, those aerial maps, they started when aviation started, so they only go back to about the mid-1930s. So one last tip I'll show you. One of the things I pulled out are these articles from the Indianapolis Star. Now, if you recall a movie that's some years old, I think it's called The Mouse Hunt. In that movie, a couple of the main characters, I think one of them was John Cleese, were researching a house, and they went to the, quote, Historical Society, where there was a giant gilt-edged book, much bigger than a city directory, that had everything you needed to know about every historic house in the community. And I could tell when I was watching this movie with my wife and daughter that a lot of people in the building were nodding and saying, "Oh, that's how that works." Well, that's not how that works. That's a Hollywood fantasy. But these newspaper articles are the closest thing to that. In Indianapolis, these started in 1909. It's actually part of my graduate research. I went through all of them and found them for one neighborhood in Indianapolis. I've since gone back through and found all the rest of them. And this is what they look like. These are unparalleled documentation of this house. And you can see I've made a note at the top because I fact-checked these. This house has been demolished. So this is the only record of the existence of this house that's on the north side of Indianapolis. And there's complete floor plans. There's an article about the house, which you probably can't read, but anyway, a lot of these articles provide the name of the architect, the builder, the interior decorator, all kinds of facts. I'm guessing if you live in another community in Indiana or elsewhere in the country, I'm guessing your local paper probably did something like this. So you might ask your librarian if there was a house building series. In Indianapolis, they were in the Sunday paper along with the real estate section appropriately. And we still actually kind of do something like this if you still get the paper. So I think that pretty much is going to wrap us up today. Sorry about the snafus earlier, folks. We had some technical issues. The Bonnet-Thompson is reopening today, so you can actually come and see some of these things. We hope you're all doing well, and we ask for your support. You can come in and see us this weekend, and hope you're doing well. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.